Now, South Africa is the world's 12th largest greenhouse gas emitter. In an effort to secure foreign investment, Eskom is pitching a $10 billion plan to shut most of its coal-fired plants by 2050 and embrace renewables like wind and solar with financing from wealthy nations. To help us unpack the energy crisis in South Africa in the context of the negotiations taking place in Glasgow in Scotland, we're now joined by Glen Tyler-Davies, who's the South African team leader of 350africa.org, a campaigns-based organisation geared towards fighting climate change. Glen, thanks very much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the programme.
Thank you for having me, Peter.
Have you had a chance to look at this first draft of the COP26 conclusion document? And if so, what are your thoughts?
I have, Peter, and I think the important thing here to mention is that it is a draft. This isn't a final document, so there's still negotiation to be done on the decision. And there are a couple of points that I think we can highlight. And the one is that, particularly for South Africa, is that it mentions phasing out of coal. However, we need that to go further, and we need to phase out all fossil fuels, so oil and gas as well as coal. Further, there is money for a just transition and a mention of that, but it doesn't go into a lot of details. And now we've seen something around that already happening, the deal that you've mentioned, or the pledge at least, to help Eskom with its just transition plans. But there are very few details beyond that. So we really need to see details of what the money is going to be used for, where it's going to come from, what conditions are going to be attached to it, and that it has justice at the heart of any funding that comes towards nations that are working to mitigate and adapt to climate change. And then lastly, we need to the draft mentions stopping the subsidies of fossil fuels. Now, beyond the subsidies, that's a good start, but it doesn't go far enough. We need to make sure that all funding for new fossil fuel projects is cut off. So, good start, but not quite far enough yet.
Yeah, it is a draft, but often drafts give you an idea of the direction and the thinking. So perhaps, as you say, much more still needs to be put down on paper. Where does South Africa sit, do you think, in terms of ambition and commitment?
South Africa recently updated their NDC, their nationally determined contribution, and that's what they say they're going to do in terms of fighting climate change. And it was an improvement on their previous one, but however, it's still insufficient. We still need to see more work done by South Africa. For instance, in our integrated resource plan, our energy plan for the country, there are still plans to build new coal-fired power stations. Now, as I mentioned already, the draft final decision mentions phasing out coal. We need to make sure then that we're not building new coal-fired power stations, that we're really nixing all plans to go into additional coal. So it is a start, it is an improvement, but we still have a way to go, particularly to reach our fair share of reaching that 1.5 degree heating limit that you mentioned.
So then you must be disappointed then that South Africa is not signing the COP26 parallel pledge to move away from coal.
Absolutely. Barbara Creecy, our Environment Minister, did give the reason for not signing on to that they didn't want to support parallel processes. However, I do see that as a bit of a cop-out. I think we do need to commit to phasing out coal. We need to put our money where our mouth is, so to speak, and we need to say that we're not going to finance any new coal-fired power stations. And we need to follow Eskom's lead in some sense in terms of saying that we're going to shut down our existing coal-fired power stations. This is what the science demands of us. So yes, definitely disappointed that we didn't take on that pledge.
Let's talk a little bit about this $8.5 billion, and it is a first phase commitment with this Just Transition Partnership. It may sound like a lot of money, but given the size of the problem, it probably isn't really, is it?
It's a good start, Peter. It's not going to solve our problem, but it is a good start, and it has a very good direction in terms of travel. And what I think it does is it will enable Eskom to start implementing the just transition plan that it's laid out. We, of course, would like to see justice at the heart of that plan, and that means that no people are left behind in the transition to renewable energy, and that there's more a system change from our centralized control of power generation to community ownership of power generation going forward. So that's something we as 350 Africa would like to see in the future. But as I say, it is a start. A large part of the money will go to Eskom to support their just transition plans. And there is also money for instance, putting us as an economy at the forefront of this energy revolution that's happening around the world. And that's in the form of changing our car manufacturing to manufacture electric cars as well. So that's another positive point. But again, if we really want to center justice in these sorts of deals and these sorts of transactions, we need to make sure that we're thinking beyond just switching from combustion engine cars to electric cars. We need to be thinking rather about public transport that will provide people who don't currently have access to transport and can't afford a car with affordable public transport that is also clean and efficient.
Yeah, when you say that, I was just thinking about Kenya introducing electric buses. Do you think South Africa is lagging behind some of our African counterparts?
I've been very pleased to see some electric buses on the streets of Cape Town already. So there is stuff happening, and there is, changes happening. And municipalities are talking about electrifying their fleet, which are obviously at the moment has a huge emissions impact. So we may be lagging, and I think there's a lot more we can be doing, but these sorts of commitments to scale up our production of electric vehicles could really be a game changer in that regard. Imagine if we could be producing fleets of electric buses in South Africa for use on our roads. I think that would be a fantastic start.
What about Eskom? Are you satisfied that they are committed to this transition and that they are taking significant steps? I saw that the Komati power station, I think, is being converted into a renewables station. So that is an indicator, isn't it, that the thinking is towards green and clean?
A fantastic start in Komati, yes, and that's exactly what we would like to see more of. And importantly, that's indicative of this justice in the transition, in the fact that we're not taking jobs away from current communities and workers, but we're retooling, we're reskilling people to work in the new energy economy, in the clean, renewable energy economy. So that's very important, and I think it's something that we need to follow. And Eskom's just transition plan in general is solid. We believe there could be more that could be done. They could be definitely more ambitious. We think that, again, justice and this idea of changing the system of power generation could be at the heart of it. However, it's a very good start. One of the big obstacles at the moment to that is our Department of Mineral Resources and Energy and our Minister, Greta Mantashe, who seems to be wanting to, at every turn, block any chance of a just transition that we had. And if we see the direction of travel in the world to renewable energy, to this new energy future, it really just seems to be turning us around 180 and going in the opposite direction. Talking about new coal, talking about this mirage of somehow we'll have clean coal, which is an absolute myth. I think the big obstacle there is the DMRE and Mantashe, and that's really what needs to change.
Do you think that South Africa perhaps needs a climate minister? Denmark have got one, which I found quite fascinating. And I ask this because you have such a central issue now that everybody should be dealing with. It probably needs a single entity to coordinate all of these efforts, because you've got energy on the one hand, Ministry of Environment on the other, and sometimes one gets a sense that they're not always talking the same language.
It's interesting you mentioned that, Peter. 350africa.org, together with other organizations, particularly the Climate Justice Coalition and the African Climate Alliance, delivered a petition to Parliament at a protest on the 24th of September. And one of the things that we were calling for there was a cross-parliamentary committee on climate change. So not quite a minister, but a committee that would work across the different departments, the different ministries in Parliament to look at the central issue of climate change. So that could be a real step in the right direction. But I think more importantly, the time for committees, the time for promises and pledges, the time for talk is over. We really need to see action on the ground. We really need to see any talk of new coal-fired power stations, of exploration for fossil fuels to end immediately, including the funding of those fossil fuels. And we need to see concrete steps taken to get us out of load shedding through renewable energy, not some fanciful dream like power ships burning gas in our harbors. We really need to see affordable, quick to implement renewable energy across the country.